So let's talk about what happens if you have a lesion along this pathway, somewhere in this pathway. Okay. So first, hopefully you remember that if you have a lesion before the pathway crosses, then the deficits will be ipsilateral to the lesion itself. So let's look at that. Okay, so let's say we have a lesion right here. Okay, we've got a lesion of the dorsal root ganglion at the level of T6. Okay, so what will be lost when you have a lesion of the dorsal root ganglion? Hopefully you remember that dorsal is the somatosensory information. Okay, so you won't, even though in this video we're only talking about fine discrimination from the body, the dorsal root ganglion will have all of the somatosensory information. So if you have a lesion of the ganglion, you'll have a focal loss of pain and temperature and fine discrimination touch and proprioception, both non-conscious and conscious proprioception. You'll lose all of sensation. If the lesion's focal to just T6, then you'll only lose that for the T6 dermatome. Okay, so a focal lesion peripherally will create focal symptoms. Those symptoms will be ipsilateral to the lesion, so that if your lesion's on the left side, you will have a loss of those sensations around the T6 dermatome on the left side. Okay, left side. And the reason is here's the lesion. Let's go back to where we can't feel. Where are the receptors that aren't working anymore? Here they are, right on the same side, right? Here's our midline over here. And so the lesion is ipsilateral to the loss because these are the receptors that won't work because their path to cortex is interrupted. Okay, so the other interesting feature of this is the fact that it's focal, right? Because information that entered the cord below T6 will already be traveling up in the cord, and you haven't lesioned the cord itself, right? So all that information will be attacked. The same thing with information entering above the T6. That is not lesioned with this focal T6 lesion. Okay, so that's not affected. Okay, what happens if we have a lesion? So let's say this is intact, the DRG is intact. Okay, and instead, we have a lesion of the dorsal funiculus, or dorsal white matter within the cord. Let's say again it's T6. Okay, we're going to make this lesion at T6. So we have a lesion of the dorsal white matter at T6. What happens? So the first thing that you want to ask yourself is what is being carried there? What modality is being carried there? And hopefully you'll know that fine discrimination touch. Right? That's the fine discrimination touch pathway. So you're going to have a loss of fine discrimination touch. Now, will that be ipsilateral or contralateral? Here's the midline. So let's go back from the lesion to where we can't feel. Oh, here's where we can't feel anymore. Right? So same side. This is all the left side. Okay, so the deficit will be ipsilateral to the lesion itself. You have a lesion of the left dorsal funiculus at T6. You're going to have a loss of fine discrimination touch on the left side for T6 dermatomes and down. Okay, why and down? Why is it more than focal? Because all the information that entered underneath T6 is also running in this same location. Now, why don't you affect the upper body? Right, the upper body will enter above T6, right? So it's going to enter above the lesion, so therefore it's completely unaffected by the lesion itself. Okay? So now let's say we have a lesion of the gracile nucleus, right? Here's our lesion. A lesion of the gracile nucleus. Okay, so when you hear gracile nucleus, hopefully you think of lower body and fine discrimination touch. So we're going to have a loss of fine discrimination touch on the lower body, and if the lesion's on the left side, the deficit will be on the left side. You see, the pathway hasn't crossed yet. Okay, so ipsilateral loss of fine discrimination touch on the lower body. All right. Now, what happens if you have a lesion of the medial lemniscus? Okay, hopefully you want to associate that name with the modality. Medial lemniscus, hopefully it becomes very quick for you to say fine discrimination touch. Okay, so now you know you've got a loss of fine discrimination touch, and hopefully you also know its body. Right? Whenever you hear the word trigeminal, you're going to think head and face. There's no word trigeminal here, so it's body. It's not head and face. Okay, so loss of fine discrimination touch on the body, the lesions on the right side, and where can you no longer feel? Let's go back to, follow this pathway back to where you can't feel. Oh, here's where you can't feel. Okay, on the left side's where you can't feel, the lesions on the right. Okay, so a lesion of the medial lemniscus results in contralateral loss of fine discrimination touch on the body. Okay, because you have the full body now in this medial lemniscus, that will be upper and lower body as long as you lesion the full tract, right? If you lesion the whole tract, then you're going to have that deficit on the full body. Now, if you have a lesion anywhere above here, you're going to have pretty much the same symptoms, right? In the cortex, in the thalamus, VPL, you're also going to have a contralateral loss of fine discrimination touch, right, on the body. Now, if you lesion the full VPL, hopefully you'll remember that not only is fine discrimination touch there, but also pain and temperature. So if you got the full VPL, you'd also lose pain and temperature. Okay? Same thing with the cortex, right? In the cortex, if you lost your whole post-central gyrus, then you're going to have a loss of pain and temperature, fine discrimination touch, and proprioception, okay, on the body. Often these cortical lesions will be relatively focal. For instance, it might be just part of the face, it could be just part, a hand. It could be a relatively focal because the cortex is expanded into a large area. So to get the full body, you'd have to have a large lesion in the cortex.